check your motivation, your reason for being here. And in case you don't already have a altruistic motivation, feeling the wish to benefit yourself and all other beings, then generate such a motivation. For example, you can remember that we have certain things in common. We all wish for happiness, good experiences. We all wish to be free of bad, painful experiences. And we all have the ability, the potential to achieve this, to be completely free of suffering and its causes, and to fully develop the most perfect peace and happiness and its causes. So try to think that your reason for being here is to understand the means to do that, so that you can bring that about for yourself and all other beings. So last April, about 2 months ago, we had one class on this topic of the mental factors, April the 18th. And I made a kind of set of notes, an outline with this material. So I hope everybody has a copy of that. And so in that class, we only managed to get through the kind of introductory material about this topic, and then looked at the first 5 of the mental factors, the omnipresent mental factors. So we'll pick up from there and continue. But I thought that before we do that, we could start with a bit of a review, just to refresh our memories about it. So I'm going to ask you some questions. I hope you can remember the answers. Okay, so this topic then is looking at 2 types of phenomena that are called main minds or primary minds and mental factors. Okay, so that's a division of phenomena. But what is it that's divided into these? What is the basis of this division? What's divided into these 2 groups? Consciousnesses. We can also say awarenesses. There's these different terms in Tibetan and Sanskrit that refer to mind in general. Mind, awareness, consciousness. And it's that which is clear in knowing. That which is clear in knowing. So phenomena that's clear in knowing can be divided up into main minds and mental factors. So whatever is a consciousness is either one of these, main mind or mental factor. And how many main minds are there? 6? Yeah. What are they? Ear, nose, tongue, body, and mind, mental consciousness. Okay, so there's 6 different types of primary minds. And do you remember, like, what's the function of a primary mind, or how does a primary mind relate to its object? You don't have to use exact words, but just roughly. In a general way, yeah. A main mind is just aware of the general presence or existence of the object without going into the fine details. And mental factors, on the other hand, that's their job, is to go into the details of objects. How many mental factors are there? There's different ways of numbering them, but the usual way in our tradition, the Satrantika school, how many mental factors are there? 51, yeah. That's good enough. 84,000 delusions, disturbing emotions. Yeah, there's actually more than 51. It's not that that's a fixed number and there's no more than that, but these are the usual ones that are explained because, in terms of our spiritual practice, what we're trying to do with our mind, eliminate the disturbing aspects of the mind that cause suffering, develop the beneficial aspects of the mind that cause happiness and that help us get out of suffering, liberation, enlightenment. So if that's our purpose, then these 51 factors are the most important ones we need to know about. And what's the relationship between main minds and mental factors? Like, are they mutually inclusive or mutually exclusive, or how many possibilities? Yeah, that's true. That's they always come together in a package. But I guess what I meant was, if we take these two groups, main minds and mental factors, is there any overlap? Are they mutually inclusive or mutually exclusive? Or how many possibilities are there? Like you're doing in the debate class. Venerable Kunga.
Mutually exclusive.
Yes, they're mutually exclusive, which means there's nothing that's both. Nothing can be both a main mind and a mental factor. So we have three possibilities. There's something that's a main mind but not a mental factor. What would be an example of a main mind that's not a mental factor?
Visual consciousness.
Yeah, any of the main minds. It's not a mental factor. What would be an example of a mental factor that's not a main mind? Attachment, yeah. And is there any, okay, we already said there's nothing that's both. Something that's neither? Something that's neither a main mind nor a mental factor? Form? A lamp? A table? Yeah. Okay, so there's lots of things that are outside of those two categories, but those two are mutually exclusive. And then, yeah, can they operate on their own? Can you have a main mind all by itself or a mental factor all by itself? Venerable Sangye already mentioned that. No, they always operate together in a package, in a group. And the minimum that we can have is five mental factors. So there's always. That's what we looked at last time, the 5 omnipresent mental factors. They're called omnipresent because they are always present. They are always together, accompanying every main mind. But there could be more than 5. There could be additional ones as well. And we also looked at 5 similarities between the main mind and the mental factors that are together in one package. They use the word retinue. The main mind being a bit like a boss or a king, and then the mental factors being like employees or ministers of a king. They use the word retinue. So there are these 5 similarities, 5 features they have in common. Do you remember any of those? That's okay. It's been 2 months.
So it says, a main mind and the mental factors have 5 similarities. 1 is the basis or support. They arise in dependence on the same and common empowering condition, meaning the sense power. Object of observation is the same. The aspect, that means Both the main mind and its accompanying mental factors are generated in the aspect of the object. Time, they arise, abide, and cease simultaneously. And the last one is called substance or substantial entity, which means is explained in different ways. Okay, that's it.
Yeah, that's good enough. So let's just take an example. Let's say if we have an eye consciousness looking at this book, and when we see an object, what we're actually seeing is the shapes and colors. We don't really see a book, but we see shapes and colors, and then conceptually we think, oh, that's a book. So we look at a book, it's a blue book, so we have an eye consciousness perceiving blue. Okay, so that's the main mind, the eye consciousness perceiving blue. And then the mental factors that are accompanying that in a retinue of that have these 5 things in common, 5 similarities. One is they all arise from the same sense power. In this case, the eye sense power. So they're all dependent on the eye sense power, which is this subtle form inside the eyeball. It's not the actual eyeball, but some kind of subtle form inside. So they arise and it's dependent on that. Then they have the same object of observation, in this case the blue, color blue, and the same aspect. So the aspect is a little bit of a mysterious thing, but it's said that mind, when we perceive an object, the mind actually arises in the aspect of that object. So it's similar to when an object is reflected in a mirror. The mirror will take on an aspect or an image, a reflection of that object. So it's said the mind works in a similar way. It takes on a kind of aspect or reflection of whatever object is being perceived. So in this case, blue, so that means the mind, the visual consciousness arises in the aspect of blue, and all the mental factors in the retinue also have that aspect of blue. Time, they all occur at the same time. They arise at the same time, abide for just a tiny fraction of a moment, and then disappear at the same time. And substance, one meaning, the main meaning, the one that's usually explained, is that there can only be one mental factor of each type with each main mind. So, like feeling is an ever-present mental factor. So that's always there with every single mind. So when we have this eye consciousness perceiving blue, there's a feeling that accompanies that and feels either pleasant or unpleasant or neutral. But there can't be more than one feeling at a time. There can only be one feeling, one discrimination, one contact. You can't have 2 of the same type of mental factor at a time. So anyway, those are the 5 things that a main mind and the mental factors accompanying it have in common. And this comes up like in the philosophical teachings. They sometimes mention this. They talk about the mindfulness that has similarity with the wisdom realizing emptiness or something. Okay, so it's just good to know that term, because it means the mindfulness that's present at the same time, at the same moment as that wisdom. Okay, so then last time we looked at the 5 omnipresent mental factors. So what are those? Any of them? Feeling, discrimination, attention, intention, 2 different ones, and contact. Yeah. Okay, so those 5 accompany every single moment of mind that we have. Are they virtuous or non-virtuous? Yeah, they're neither, neutral. But they could become virtuous or non-virtuous depending on the presence of, if there's one of the virtuous mental factors like faith, if that's present in the mind, then all the five omnipresent mental factors, along with the main mind, they all become virtuous. And they say it's a bit like if you have a cup of tea and you put a spoonful of honey in it and stir it around, then all the molecules of the drink take on that taste of sweetness. If you put salt in, they all become salty and so on. Okay, so virtuous mental factors or non-virtuous mental factors will color or flavor the mind and all the other mental factors accompanying it. So tonight, hopefully, we'll be able to start talking about the virtuous mental factors after we talk about the object ascertaining ones. Okay, so I had asked Venerable Tsepel to send you a couple of files. One is a chart with all the mental factors and their definitions and so on. And then another is translation of a text on the mental factors by Kachin Yeshi Gelsen. So that's from the basic program in FPMT. So it's a bit long and complicated, but it's there if you want to read it, and it can give you additional information. So in that text, it says about these five omnipresent mental factors. If any of the five omnipresent mental factors are missing, the utilization of an object will not be complete. If feeling is absent, there will be no experience, meaning experiencing it as pleasant or unpleasant or neutral. If discrimination is absent, there will be no apprehension of the uncommon signs of the object. If intention is absent, the mind will not be directed to an object. Intention is what moves the mind to the object. If attention is absent, the mind will not be focused on a particular object of observation. So intention moves the mind in a general way to an object, and then attention will move the mind to specific features or aspects of an object. So that's the difference between intention and attention. And then if contact is absent, there will be no basis or support for feeling. Contact is necessary for the coming together of the sense power, the consciousness, and the object, so that the mind can actually perceive or cognize the object. Therefore, in order for the utilization of an object to be complete, all five omnipresent mental factors must be present without exception. Okay, so any questions about this so far? So we'll move on now to the next group of mental factors, which are called object ascertaining mental factors. So this file that I sent you, mainly, the first part is something I wrote myself, but then when it comes to the actual mental factors, the listing of the mental factors and explanation of them, I actually took it from Volume 2 of the Library of Wisdom and Compassion. What is it called? Foundations. So you must have gone through these already with Venerable Children. You went through that book. You've been going... You haven't gotten to the mental factors yet?
We did. We started.
Because that's on page 62. Yeah.
I think she went into each of them, though.
Maybe that's why she asked me to do this. Yeah. So I'll go through this file and then also read from... This is a really nice book, Mind and Its Functions from Geshe Rapton. Kind of easy language, and he uses examples from everyday life that we can relate to. So I'll read some things from here as well. So these five object ascertaining mental factors are so called because they apprehend the individual features of an object. This word ascertain has the sense of definiteness or certainty. So when we were going through the seven types of awareness some time ago, and there was one type of awareness that's called inattentive perception. Do you remember that one? When we're focused on one thing, for example, watching television, or maybe you don't watch television, but looking at the news on the internet, and we're really involved in reading some news story, and then there's some sound, like an airplane goes overhead, or the cat meows, or something like that. But you're so focused on what you're reading, the sound is registered. I mean, there is an ear consciousness, a hearing consciousness that notices the sound, but it's not fully registered. Maybe that's the word. So that later on, you can't remember exactly what that was. What was that sound? You heard something, but not sure what it was. Okay. So that kind of experience, which we have all the time, is a lack of ascertainment. The mind has not ascertained the object. The mind has perceived or noticed the object, but hasn't ascertained it. So ascertain means you're really certain about it, definite about it, so that later on you're able to remember it with certainty. I know I heard that. I know I saw that. So if you don't have that kind of experience, it means there was a lack of ascertainment.
On your list of mental factors, you have there's a chart. It's determining factors?
Probably, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Ascertain, determine. Yeah, there's different translations of these. So, so these five are neither, as the previous five, they're neither virtuous nor non-virtuous. But they could become virtuous or non-virtuous depending on the presence of a virtuous or non-virtuous mental factor. So in Geshe Rabden's book, so he says these five are they're said to ascertain their objects because they perform the function of ascertaining their particular objects by means of distinguishing a specific characteristic of the objective field. For example, aspiration, that's the first of the five, ascertains that which is desirable within the objective field. Appreciation, the second one, that which has been understood as being valuable. And recollection or mindfulness, that which has to be borne in mind. Those are just examples. When the mind is actively engaged in a task, be it wholesome or unwholesome, all of these mental factors are constantly at work, giving direction, coherence, and meaning to the train of our thought and behavior. In Vasubandhu's Abhidharma Kosha, Treasury of Knowledge, which is one of the 5 texts that are studied in the Geshe programs in the monasteries. So in his text, he says these 5 are also omnipresent. So, in fact, he says there are 10 omnipresent mental factors. The previous 5 plus these 5. But that's not so in the other traditions. So the Sautrantika and the other schools say, no, these are not omnipresent. And in the Dalai Lama's this book, the Dalai Lama, he says the compendium of knowledge. The compendium of knowledge is by a Sangye, Abhidharma Samuccaya, Vasubandhu's brother. He says the compendium of knowledge asserts that they accompany only virtuous mental states. But other sources say otherwise. So I want to ask Venerable Children about that. For example, in Geshe Rabden's book, he says they can also accompany non-virtuous, mistaken states of mind. So maybe there's different opinions about that. And I also heard I heard this from a student who did the master's program many years ago. She said that these 5 only accompany conceptual minds, not non-conceptual minds. But I have doubt about that. Because, for example, the wisdom directly realizing emptiness, that's a non-conceptual mind. So if we say these five mental factors only accompany conceptual minds, that means the wisdom directly realizing emptiness doesn't have concentration, doesn't have wisdom, doesn't have mindfulness. That doesn't sound right. So, yeah, I have doubt about that. Anyway, so there's probably different points of view. So again, these 5 are not virtuous on their own, but if there is a virtuous mental factor in the mind, like faith, then these will also become virtuous. His Holiness says, these 5 are not themselves virtuous, but become virtuous because of being associated with a virtuous mental state. In this case, the mindfulness accompanying a mental consciousness that apprehends and has aversion toward a repulsive object would not be the mindfulness of the 5 object ascertaining mental factors, but would be a different mental factor similar to it. So that's an interesting. So he seems to be saying that if we have a non-virtuous state of mind, like anger, hatred, greed, jealousy, and if there's mindfulness there or concentration there, it wouldn't be mindfulness and concentration included in these 5. Yeah, because I used to wonder about that. For example, a cat. If a cat sees a mouse or a bird or a spider, some kind of prey. I've seen this. I've seen cats just totally concentrated, like just, not moving, just focused completely on that little animal. It looks like concentration. Even if you try to make a noise or call their name, they just... Or a hunter, when a hunter is... aiming his rifle or her rifle at a deer, for example, they have to have very good concentration if they want to succeed in what they're doing. So there's concentration there, even though it's accompanying a non-virtuous state of mind, the desire to kill. So it seems that what His Holiness is saying here is that wouldn't be the concentration that's included in these 5. So that means there's another concentration somewhere that's not included in these 5. That may be one point of view, but again, like in Geshe Rabden's book, and I think I was trying to remember another source, also said that these 5 can accompany non-virtuous states of mind and also neutral states of mind. Like when we're driving, we have to concentrate. We should be concentrating. Concentrating on what we're doing. But that's not really virtuous, not necessarily virtuous, just a neutral state of mind. So anyway, there's probably different points of view and lots of debates about this, but anyway. So let's go through these 5. First one is called aspiration. And this takes a strong interest in an intended object and is the basis for joyous effort. So that doesn't say a whole lot. So Geshe Rabden elaborates on that. In general, any wish or yearning to obtain a particular object is an aspiration. Depending upon the nature of that object or goal, the aspiration becomes wholesome and constructive or unwholesome and destructive. So right here he says, there can be unwholesome aspiration. It is thus important to learn which objects are worthy of aspiration and which are not. There is a 3-fold classification of aspiration. Aspiration to encounter once again that which has passed. What would be an example of that? Aspiration to meet something that has already passed. Yeah, yeah. Or I was also thinking of nostalgia. You know, you went to some nice place and you had some nice experience, and then you long to go back there and relive that experience, have that experience again. So maybe that's an example of that. And the second is aspiration not to be separated from what one is experiencing at present. So the aspiration not to lose this nice meditation experience that might be happening right now, not to have to leave Sravasti Abbey and live somewhere else where it's noisy and crowded and polluted and crazy. And third is aspiration to achieve a certain goal in the future. So these are like related to past, present, and future. Aspiration about something from the past, aspiration about something in the present, aspiration about something in the future. So the future could be, for example, aspiration to have a good rebirth. We're supposed to generate these aspirations all the time. Every morning when waking up, may I use my life well and do everything with the wish to reach enlightenment. May everything I do be a cause for enlightenment and beneficial for all sentient beings and so on. So those are aspirations. Yeah? Aspirations.
Always get me into a quagmire about the relationship to attachment, but how is this kind of aspiration different from desire?
Yeah. Well, I was wondering about that as well, but maybe we can leave that until we get to attachment and have more to... Yeah, and it's tricky because desire, there is a word for desire, but it's dupa, and it's not necessarily a negative thing because they talk about desire for liberation. Desire for liberation. But the word for attachment is de chak, so it's de attachment plus, no, de desire plus chak, attachment. So the usual word for attachment is chak. So de chak is the word for attachment, and that's always non-virtuous. That's never a good thing. That's usually for sense objects and wealth and so on. So yeah, maybe when we get to that part of the text, we can talk about that. But I remember this one time I was teaching, I can't remember the context. It was a retreat that we were doing in Spain, and there was this guy who was his very first retreat, learning about Buddhism for the first time. And I think I did talk about attachment and aspiration and the difference between them. And he said something about, a car. So if I have, is it possible to have the aspiration to have a car? Like if we just replace the word attachment with aspiration, then does it become virtuous? Something like that. I don't remember the exact thing, but it's kind of funny. He was trying to get around saying that there was attachment, for a certain type of car. And I don't remember what I said, but I said, well, maybe it depends on why you want the car. I mean, if you want the car because, just to enjoy yourself or to look impressive to other people, that's one thing. But on the other hand, if you're doing a lot of beneficial work, if you're a doctor, for example, or a veterinarian, and you need a car to be able to go out and help beings who are suffering, so then the aspiration to have a car would be virtuous. Yeah. Anyway, so we can look at that one later. But yeah, in Dharma practice, aspiration is very important. For example, have the aspiration to use our precious human life wisely, not waste it, not do things that are non-virtuous and harmful and so on. Aspiration to attain good rebirths, liberation, enlightenment, realizations of the path, wisdom realizing emptiness, calm abiding, and so on. So we have to have aspiration for these things to be able to have the energy, because it said the aspiration is the basis for joyous effort. So we have to have aspiration to achieve these goals so that we'll put energy, effort, joyous effort in. But on the other hand, ordinary people would have aspiration for other kinds of goals, like becoming a billionaire, becoming the winner of the Eurovision singing contest or whatever. I don't know, all kinds of worldly, mundane aspirations mixed with the 8 worldly concerns. Those kinds of aspirations. Not necessarily virtuous, and they could be non-virtuous. Okay, then number 2. Is appreciation. Some translators use the term belief. And so this stabilizes the apprehension of a previously ascertained object and holds it such that it cannot be distracted by another view. Okay, so Geshe Baptin gives a bit more explanation. It has the function of cherishing the object and securing the recollection of it. Appreciation of an object only follows after the object's qualities have been ascertained as being worthwhile or valuable. So, for example, we meditate on the preciousness of the human life, where we have to identify what is a precious human rebirth and do I have one? And once we've realized that we do, we've ascertained that we do have a precious human life, then we need to make that appreciation very, very strong. So that's probably this mental factor. I really appreciate the fact that I have this life and I have all the opportunities, even to have health and mental health and all the resources that we have, food to eat, a place to live, companions on the spiritual path, and so on. So we need to really, pump up that appreciation so that we don't take it for granted and we don't waste it, and also aspire, have the aspiration to have another one in the future as well. Create the causes to have another such life in the future. So that would be an example in terms of Dharma practice. Once appreciated in this way, the mind will be far more inclined to pursue a certain form of behavior in order to either obtain the object or realize a goal embodied in or otherwise related to the object. In the practice of Dharma, appreciation is an essential element for a meaningful state of faith and confidence. The stronger one's appreciation of the natures and characteristics of the Buddha, Dharma, and Sangha, for example, the stronger will be one's faith in their infallibility, and the stronger one's motivation to realize one's spiritual goals. So appreciation precedes faith. We think about, meditate on, and get familiar with the qualities, the characteristics of the 3 jewels, the Buddha, Dharma, and Sangha. How great they are and how helpful they are for us and others and so on and so forth. And then that gives rise to faith. And then, of course, refuge and the wish to follow the Buddha's teachings, to live our lives in accordance with that. In fact, the Buddha himself, in the sutra requested by Sagaramati, has said that appreciation is the very root of all that is wholesome. There are limitless forms of appreciation, since the objects appreciated by the limitless sentient beings are infinite. Like we talk about music appreciation, right? Music appreciation of music. Are there courses in that? Yeah. And art appreciation and wine appreciation and so on. So all kinds of things you can have appreciation for. But in brief, we can talk about 2 kinds of appreciation, those that are mistaken and those that are realistic. He doesn't give examples of those. What would be a mistaken appreciation?
Would it be like appreciating a wrong view?
probably, or wrong object of refuge. One that doesn't lead you out of suffering, but maybe leads you to more suffering. I was thinking about some of these spiritual, I guess, I don't know if we can even call them spiritual teachers. Charles Manson, Jim Jones. Remember, some of you may be too young to remember those, but there were a lot of people who appreciated them. Well, maybe a lot, but yeah, there were people who appreciated those people, but they were led to non-virtue and even death. In the case of Jim Jones, 900 people committed suicide because he said to drink this, what was it, Kool-Aid laced with cyanide. 900 people.
I was thinking any samsaric happiness or pleasure, if you appreciate it, it's mistaken because it's actually suffering.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Heroin, alcohol, cigarettes. Yeah. So having appreciation for those and whatever little bit of pleasure you get from them, then that leads to further suffering. Okay, so that's those are some examples of, what does he call it? Mistaken appreciation, and then realistic appreciation. From the point of view of Buddhism, would be appreciation of the three jewels, for example, of the spiritual path, of the goals, enlightenment, and liberation, and so on. Or just appreciation of virtue, wanting to live a virtuous life, an ethical life, kindness, compassion, trying to cultivate these qualities and live these qualities. So these would be realistic appreciations. Okay, next is mindfulness. Smrti. I don't know how you say that. We have three consonants together. Smrti. Did you study Sanskrit at all? Okay, so this, the definition of this, repeatedly brings to mind, one, a phenomenon of, oh, sorry, I put the numbers in, they're not there, but it said that there are these three features, three qualities of mindfulness. And so the first is the phenomenon of previous acquaintance. So the object of mindfulness is something we're already acquainted with, something we are familiar with, not like brand new, first time experiencing it, but something familiar. Then, without forgetting it, that's the second quality, non-forgetfulness, not forgetting it. And the third is, it does not allow the mind to be distracted from the object and is the basis for concentration. So mindfulness is essential in the development of concentration, because when we develop concentration, we have an object. There always has to be an object. It could be the breath or an image of the Buddha, mantra, whatever. And so mindfulness plays the role of keeping the object in mind, not forgetting it, so that the mind can then stay focused on it, concentrated on it. So this is a really, really important mental factor. I'll just read what Geshe Rabten says. He calls it recollection, because actually the word for mindfulness is the same as the word for memory or remembering. So even in ordinary Tibetan, they use Janpa for I remember or I don't remember, just in everyday language, I think, yeah? Tranquimindo. Okay, so recollection operates within a wide variety of activities. During single-pointed meditation, it is the factor responsible for constantly bringing the object to mind and holding it there. So it's essential for concentration. In the practice of moral discipline or ethical discipline, it is compared to the watchman at the doorway of the mind, who has the task of being constantly mindful of the various mental factors, in particular the afflictions that arise. So it's looking out for the arisal of anger or attachment or jealousy or whatever, and trying to keep the mind away from those afflictions. Then another use is through recollection of our vows and commitments, unwholesome mental factors are unable to gain a foothold in the mind, thus causing turmoil and chaos. So we've all taken vows, and we have to remember what vows we've taken, not forget. So the recollection, the memory of our vows, the mindfulness of our vows helps us to keep ourselves in line and not go off in other directions and do unwholesome things. While studying, recollection enables one to remember what one has learned previously, and thus allows a store of knowledge to be built up. You don't want to mind like a leaky sieve. Be able to stay mindful of our knowledge. In everyday life, it gives order to one's daily activities through enabling one to remember what has to be done at particular times and so forth. So at 8:15, you have to be in here for your, what do you call it? Stand-up meeting, and then anyway, so we have a schedule. So mindfulness enables us to remember what we're supposed to do. In brief, recollection is compared to a treasure house that can store many wholesome qualities without letting them perish. There is basically a twofold classification of recollection into those that disturb the mind and those that do not. So again, it seems like mindfulness can be non-virtuous or unwholesome. If you are mindful of unwholesome things, don't let your mind forget those. Get obsessed with them. Can't forget them. That's not very helpful. Okay, so then those that do not disturb the mind can further be divided into those that are still hindered by mental sinking and excitement, and those that are not so hindered. So the first type includes all forms of recollection that have arisen from learning and contemplation in the mind of one who has not yet attained the 9th level of mental quiescence. So mindfulness up to the 9th level. So there's still sinking and excitement. And the second type includes all recollections associated with the 9th level of mental quiescence, as well as those associated with both mental quiescences, serenity, Venerable calls it serenity, calm abiding, and penetrative insight, and beyond. Okay, so it's nice that he explains all these different uses of mindfulness, because, yeah, in Buddhist texts you do come across different ways that mindfulness functions, and then present day use of the term mindfulness meditation, and so on. It's, a kind of mindfulness, but there's much more to mindfulness than just paying attention to what's happening moment by moment by moment.
Would you be able to say anything about the mindfulness of the mind meditation and how that works?
Mindfulness of the mind?
Yeah, it's one of the 4 establishments of mindfulness.
Oh, I see.
How do you stay mindful of your mind?
I haven't really studied that one. Has anyone else studied it or practiced it? I think, yeah, you just watch the mind, observe the mind, and what's happening, what's happening moment by moment. Because mindfulness of the body is mainly paying attention to postures of the body and the impermanence of the body and what the body is made of and so forth. Mindfulness of feelings is, of course, watching that particular mental factor, which is ever present. So mindfulness of the mind, I think, is probably watching all the other aspects of the mind, the primary minds and the other mental factors and so on. Yeah, I haven't done much study or practice of that.
So when we were talking about appreciation, and you said appreciation precedes faith, could you use, instead of the word faith, conviction? Would that be capturing the same intent?
Well, I hope we'll get to faith tonight.
Oh, okay.
Once we finish these 5, we'll
Okay.
start on the
Okay.
virtuous mental factors. And the first one of those is faith. And there's 3 types of faith, one of which is called the faith of conviction, I think is what it's... yeah. So let's wait till we get to that. Yeah, there must be a difference between appreciation and faith, since they're explained as different mental factors. But it's mainly because of what Geshe Rapton said. He said, the stronger we have appreciation of the qualities of the 3 jewels, the stronger our faith will be. So there's a connection. And it seems that one precedes the other. Okay, number 4 is concentration, sometimes called single-pointedness, samadhi in Sanskrit. So this is a mental factor that dwells one-pointedly for a sustained period of time on a single object. It's the basis for developing serenity and for increasing wisdom. So Geshe Rapton says, concentration exists to some degree in the minds of all of us, even cats, dogs, birds. I don't know. At present, this faculty may be undeveloped, and only able to remain on one object for a very limited duration. I think studies done by psychologists have found that I think it's 5 or 6 seconds. That's the average amount of time that human beings are able to keep their mind focused on one object. But with continuous effort and practice, its ability to dwell one-pointedly upon a single object can be developed until, in a state of total mental quiescence, serenity, one may remain for days concentrating on a particular object. Furthermore, beings who have taken birth in one of the formless realms can spend eons and have nothing else to do. No football games to go to, no barbecues, no TV. They can spend eons absorbed in concentration on extremely subtle objects, such as the infinity of space and the infinity of consciousness. So that's their whole life. Their whole life is, they don't even have a body to take care of, so they are able to just stay totally focused some subtle object and feel very, very peaceful, calm, satisfied. But it's still samsara. It still comes to an end, and they die, they leave that realm and go somewhere else, which is probably really unpleasant. Concentration is also an important factor in the heightening of intelligence. Intelligence is his translation for wisdom, what we normally call wisdom. When we are taking a photograph, the steadier we hold the camera, the sharper will be the picture. Similarly, the firmer and more intense our concentration becomes, the sharper and more acute becomes our intelligence. So we need concentration to be able to focus on an object and be able to analyze it and see the reality of it and the true nature of it. Although there are limitless degrees of concentration, we can classify them according to their natures into 10 types. the concentrations associated with a mind within the realm of desire. That's where we are, desire realm. And then the 4 concentrations associated with the 4 levels of absorption pertaining to the form realm. The 4 concentrations associated with the 4 levels of absorption pertaining to the formless realm, and supramundane concentration. So within samsara, there are these 9 levels. Desire realm, which includes the 6 realms, or usual 6 realms, and then the 4 form realms and the 4 formless realms. So each of those has a different level and degree of concentration. And then supra-mundane concentration. Normally that term refers to Aryas, those who have realized emptiness directly. So from that point on, their minds can be supramundane. It doesn't necessarily mean every mind they have is supramundane, but especially when they're in meditation, supramundane. And again, it seems that concentration can be virtuous if we are focused on a virtuous object with virtuous motivation. It can also be neutral, like when you're just focusing on some job that you're doing. It's not necessarily virtuous or non-virtuous. Or it can be non-virtuous. For example, Milarepa, before he got into Dharma, he was practicing black magic, and it seems like that required a certain amount of concentration to be able to do these feats like destroy houses and do these harmful things that he did, kill people. So, so it's not necessarily virtuous, depends on what we're doing, what we're focusing on, why we're doing it. So, but we're, of course, trying to develop virtuous concentration on objects that increase our good qualities, help us to progress along the path, and eventually reach liberation and enlightenment. It's wonderful. Every year here there's a concentration retreat. Not easy, though.
Why do we have to do it every year?
Then number 5 is wisdom, which is also sometimes translated as intelligence, like in Geshe Rapton's book, or understanding, prajna in Sanskrit, like prajna paramita. So this functions to discriminate precisely with analysis, qualities, faults, or characteristics of an object held by mindfulness. It cuts through indecision or doubt, indecision and doubt, with certainty, and maintains the root of all constructive qualities in this and future lives. Yeah, Geshe Rapton says intelligent. He calls it intelligence. Intelligent, it's Tibetan is sherab. You don't have a sherab here, do you? Tibetan sherab. It's a very common name. That's what sherabs. Intelligence is a distinct mental factor having the specific function of fine discrimination. It examines the characteristics or the value of a recollected object, an object that we remember or are mindful of. In addition, it has the functions of A, cutting through indecision and doubt with unilateral certainty, B, maintaining the root of all wholesome qualities, both foreseeable and unforeseeable, and C, being similar to an eye that beholds or a lamp that illuminates concealed phenomena. The examining analytical quality of intelligence should not be confused with the uncertain wavering between 2 alternatives of indecision, doubt. Due to unknowing, indecision merely fluctuates between 2 alternatives. Maybe it's this, maybe it's that. Maybe there's enlightenment, maybe there isn't, maybe there's past lives, maybe there isn't. So that's not intelligence. That's not wisdom. Concerning an object about which no certainty has been found. Intelligence, on the other hand, analyzes two alternatives by means of differentiating specific characteristics of an object whose fundamental presence has been ascertained. So with wisdom, you would really analyze each of these two alternatives and come to a conclusion at some point with certainty. Intelligence can be applied in unwholesome as well as wholesome pursuits. It has enabled people to construct highly complex weapons of destruction on the one hand, and codes of ethical conduct on the other. But by far the most important role it plays is that of discerning the nature of ultimate truth, selflessness, both for the inference as well as for the direct perception of selflessness. A keen intelligence is the vital factor in reaching comprehension. Nevertheless, without being mounted upon the firm concentration of mental quiescence, it alone lacks any power to cause one to progress along the path to liberation. So we need wisdom, but we also need concentration to be able to actually progress along the path. Similarly, mental quiescence and the various other levels of concentration also lack any liberating power by themselves alone. So just with concentration, we can't free ourselves from disturbing emotions and get out of samsara. Thus, it is essential to combine the firm concentration of mental quiescence with the intelligent discrimination of penetrative insight. So then back to this file. There are various types of intelligence. So he also uses the word intelligence. Okay. A, inborn intelligence is natural acuity of mind that comes as a result of karma from previous lives. So some people are just born smart, right? You probably know people like that. They kind of breeze through school. They hardly have to study. Yeah. Just get things really fast, really quick. So that's due to imprints, karma from past lives. What did they do? What did they do in past lives? Probably developed wisdom in a positive way, in a wholesome way. Have you heard any? What is the cause of questioning the wise? Asking questions of wise people. Yeah? Where is that? Ah, okay.
You know, they talk about this progression of faith leads to aspiration, leads to joyous effort, leads to wisdom. About different topics. You have joyous effort to either understand intellectually or experience different qualities or different states of mind.
Yeah, but definitely we have to apply our intelligence to positive pursuits to be able to have intelligence in future lives as well. Okay, so there's inborn intelligence, and then B is acquired understanding or wisdom, is cultivated in this life. A person may have it with respect to various topics of the stages of the path. It is of three types. You've heard of these. Number one, the understanding or wisdom arising when hearing, learning, or studying a topic, so the wisdom of hearing, which includes listening to teachings, but also studying them on our own. It brings initial knowledge of the topic and lays the foundation for the other two types of understanding. Two is the understanding of wisdom arisen from critical reflection or contemplation. This is generated by thinking about a topic on our own or debating and discussing it with others. Through it, we gain a correct conceptual or inferential understanding of the topic. So that's what we're trying to do here by not just learning the Dharma, but also discussing it with each other to get better understanding. 3, the understanding of wisdom arisen from meditation is derived from deeper personal experience when understanding of the topic arises automatically in our mind because we are very familiar with it. So usually it's said the wisdom of meditation, arisen from meditation, is synonymous with special insight. So that means the union of calm abiding and special insight. It doesn't have to be about emptiness. It could be about impermanence, or it could be about just about anything. But having that union of single-pointed mind, concentration, and wisdom penetrating the topic. But we can't achieve that without the first two types of wisdom. So I don't know about you, but I'm still very much on the first two levels, especially the first one, trying to do the second one as well. Geshe Repton mentions another two types of wisdom. He says, furthermore, we can distinguish between intelligence that analyzes what actually exists, i.e. selflessness, and intelligence that analyzes what conventionally exists. So conventional wisdom. So I suppose that could also include just ordinary conventional wisdom, analyzing the water system, trying to figure out what's wrong with it, what needs to be done to get it fixed, and so on. Analyzing your computer to fix problems and get it to work better or whatever. Analyzing the political situation and trying to understand what's going on and what we can do about it, and so on. Okay, so those are the 5 so-called object ascertaining. And in our tradition, the Sautrantika tradition, they're not always present. They're not necessarily always there. But what Geshe Repton said is when we're involved in a task, then at least some of them would be present.
In Lama Tsongkhapa practice, Manjushri practice, it talks about the 6 wisdoms.
Mm-hmm.
There's hearing, thinking, and meditating, but then there's also the debating, teaching, and writing.
Mm-hmm.
Where do those come from, and where do they fit in this sequence? Do you know?
I don't know. It's not mentioned in these Lorik books, but I don't know the source of those.
Is it because of the last type of conventional wisdom you mentioned that we say that this is not necessarily a virtuous mental state in and of itself?
Yeah, because Geshe Repton mentioned building weapons of mass destruction. Okay. Although the people who built those, I don't know if they necessarily did it with a bad intention. Maybe their intention was protection rather than destruction. That's the case in Israel, actually. I was reading a book about Israel, and they actually have nuclear weapons, although they're a little bit secret. But the main reason was deterrence. They've never used them. Deterrence, just to let their neighbors know, we've got these, so don't mess with us, kind of thing. But still, I mean, you just never know if that some crazy person gets into the, president's seat, then they could do harmful things. Yeah.
Yeah, so you can have shirap that is afflictive?
Well, that's what, yeah. Again, at the beginning of this section, His Holiness said they're only accompanying virtuous states of mind, but Geshe Repton says not necessarily. They could also accompany unwholesome. So there's probably different points of view, maybe different scholars, different yikchas, the different monasteries. Yeah. But yeah, I mean, it does require a lot of intelligence, for example, to rob a bank or to, do non-virtuous things sometimes. You need to really think a lot and plan and what's the best way of doing it and how to avoid getting caught and so on and so forth. Committing a murder or terrorist act. So there's a lot of, careful thought and planning going into that.
We talk about the 10 afflictions, and there's 5 views and 5 non-views. And I seem to remember the 5 views are described as an afflicted wisdom.
Afflictive wisdoms, yeah, that's right.
Yeah. So it's a type, it's
Chitta.
discerning, but it's erroneous. So I think this wisdom is only talking about a specific type of virtue.
Well, again, like His Holiness said, he used the example of mindfulness. If there's mindfulness that accompanies an unwholesome state of mind, it's not the mindfulness that's included in these 5. So that's one way of getting around it, you know. Well, it is wisdom, but it's not this kind of wisdom. But on the other hand, other teachers, for example, Geshe Rabten, says otherwise, that it could be afflicted. So again, different views. And I mean, to me, it seems clear that there is intelligence involved in some of these non-virtuous actions, like building bombs and chemical warfare and even planning wars, planning attacks. Yeah, a lot of intelligence. I wouldn't be able to do it. Not that I would want to, but you have to be really sharp and clear. So, yeah. So it is intelligence. And I guess what His Holiness would say, yes, it's intelligence, but not in the context of these 5 object ascertaining mental factors. Anyway. So let's move on, go a little bit further, because it'd be nice to start with the next group, the virtuous mental factors. And there's 11 of these. Isn't that wonderful? So what His Holiness says is the 11 virtuous mental factors cause the omnipresent, object ascertaining, and variable mental factors to take on a virtuous aspect and bring peace to oneself and others. So there's 3 groups of mental factors. The first 2 we've already looked at, omnipresent and object ascertaining. And then right at the end, there's what are called the variable mental factors, of which there's 4. So those 3 groups of mental factors are neither virtuous nor non-virtuous in themselves, but will become so. They can become virtuous at least, depending on the presence of one of these virtuous mental factors. And he says each of the 11 is an antidote to particular afflictions. So when I was studying the Abhidharmakosha during the master's program, I was really happy to come across an explanation of what exactly is virtue, because we talk a lot about virtue and virtuous and non-virtuous, and it was never that clear to me what is virtue, what is non-virtue, what constitute those. So in the Abhidharmakosha, it explains 4 types of virtue. The first is virtue or virtuous by nature, meaning just its very nature is to be virtuous. So virtuous by nature refers to these 11 virtuous mental factors. So they are naturally virtuous. Their nature, their entity is to be virtuous. So that's actually the main virtue. The second type of virtue is called virtue by concomitance. And this refers to any other mental factors as well as the main mind that accompany a virtuous mental factor. So they all become virtuous by concomitance, by association, just like the honey in the cup of tea. Okay, so the spoonful of honey would be like a virtuous mental factor. And when that's added to the cup of tea, the whole thing becomes sweet. So when a virtuous mental factor is present in the mind, that mind, the main mind and all the other mental factors, all take on this sweetness of virtue. And the third type of virtue is virtue by motivation. This refers to actions that are done motivated by virtuous mental factors. So, for example, out of faith, we do prostrations, or we meditate on loving kindness, or make offerings, and so on. So any actions we do motivated by a virtuous mental state. So those become virtuous. And then the fourth type of virtue is called ultimate virtue, and that refers to nirvana, liberation, because it's the ultimate happiness. So in general, it's also said the way to know if something is virtuous or not is by the result. What if it brings happiness? The result of virtue is happiness. Not just ordinary sensory happiness, like when we eat ice cream, but genuine happiness, especially the higher forms of happiness, liberation, enlightenment. So virtue is what brings happiness, the cause of happiness. And then there are these four types of virtue, but the main, as we can see, the main one is these virtuous mental factors. It's the main type of virtue. Because if they are present, our actions become virtuous. If they are present, the rest of the mind and mental factors together with them become virtuous. So anyway, I really like that explanation. Just gave a bit more understanding of this word virtue and what is virtuous. Okay, so the first of the 11 virtuous mental factors is faith. And sometimes translated as confidence or trust. So this is confidence in such things as the law of karma and its effects, and the 3 jewels. It produces a joyous state of mind, free from the turmoil of the root and auxiliary afflictions, and is the basis for generating the aspiration to develop new constructive qualities and enhancing virtuous aspirations already generated. So it's the basis for new qualities and also increasing, enhancing virtuous qualities we already have. It's of 3 types. The first is called inspired faith, sometimes called faith of aspiration, I think, or admiring faith. No, that's the second one, admiring faith in here, yeah. So it knows the qualities of the object and rejoices in them. So, for example, we think about the Buddha and the qualities of the Buddha, and we feel joyful, we feel happy, we feel, inspired. That's faith, that kind of faith. And then aspiring faith knows the qualities of the objects and aspires to attain them. So that would be where not only do we feel happy about the qualities of the Buddha, but we feel, I want to be like that. I want to develop those qualities myself. And the third, convictional faith or believing faith, knows the qualities of the object and has confidence in it. So this is said to be the best form of faith, because to develop it, one needs to really do investigation, think about. Not just because your teacher said so, or the books say so, or you just feel this burst of inspiration. But you've really thought about, the Buddha, his teachings, his life, what he did, and so on and so forth, and gotten to the point where you feel convinced. So as I say, the first 2 kinds of faith can still be shaken. Like if you meet somebody who tells you the opposite, the Buddha is, like trashing the Buddha, trashing the Buddha's teachings. So then if you listen to that and you find your mind starting to lose your confidence and starting to doubt the Buddha and his qualities, so that means your faith isn't that strong. It's probably one of the first 2 types of faith. As I say, if you have the third type of faith, no matter what anybody says, you're not going to change. You're not going to have doubt or be shaken. Definitely, because you've really thought about it. You've really checked it out, thought about it, come to a conclusion based on your own thinking and understanding. So you can't be shaken. Like the Dalai Lama says when he meets with people of other religions and they're talking about God and, having so much devotion to Creator God. He admires this. He says he really rejoices that they have this faith, but he's convinced. Yeah, we don't believe in such a God. Yeah, so that's the best type of faith to have. So Geshe Rabten says, faith or confidence is extremely important as the foundation of the practice of Dharma. The Buddha once said that just as a burnt seed is unable to produce a seedling, likewise a mind devoid of faith is unable to cultivate anything wholesome. Ooh, that's pretty awful. If we have firm confidence in something, such as the certainty that suffering inevitably arises from unwholesome actions, then we shall automatically be motivated to adjust our behavior accordingly and abstain from such activity. So that's a kind of faith. If we're convinced that killing and so on, stealing, the 10 non-virtuous actions bring suffering, then there's no hardship, Not like we have to really restrain ourselves to avoid killing. We don't want to kill. We're happy to avoid killing. And that's a kind of faith. We have conviction that that is something that will only bring suffering to others, to myself, to the world. It's definitely a bad thing to do, and I'm definitely not going to do it. Similarly, if we have confidence in the reliability of a particular person, then we shall have no hesitation in believing what he says and following any advice he may give us. So this is what we're trying to cultivate with our spiritual teachers. Really convinced that they are genuine, good people, and they're looking out for us and will guide us in a good way, in a good direction, and so on. Faith does not only mean to have a reverent attitude before certain holy beings. It should be understood as a factor of mind capable of broadening and expanding one's understanding. Yeah, so it's, blind faith. We often talk about blind faith, which many people have. They just like this, but they don't necessarily have much understanding of the objects that they're showing this reverence for. Many people in Asia are like that, they show a lot of faith, a lot of devotion, but if you ask them, well, who is the Buddha anyway? What is the Buddha? What did he teach? They have a hard time answering. I mean, it's not bad to have that kind of faith. It's better than no faith, but it's better to have the third type of faith based on conviction. There's in the Kachin Yeshe Gelsen text, there's a quotation from a sutra called the 10 Dharmas Sutra. Faith is the best of vehicles through which you will be guided and definitely emerge. Therefore, intelligent people rely on following faith. Wholesome qualities do not grow in people who have no faith, just as green sprouts do not grow from seeds scorched by fire. Yeah, so I was wondering, people who had faith or have faith in these teachers who are a little bit crazy and guiding them in the wrong directions, would that be faith? This virtuous mental factor? I mean, it kind of looks like faith, but then because of what it leads to, the result doesn't lead to happiness and benefit and peace. It leads to non-virtue and suffering and confusion. So, yeah, I think faith is only faith if the object that we have faith in really does have good qualities and really is reliable and really is guiding us in a good direction. So if the object isn't like that, and is even the opposite of that, guiding you to more suffering and confusion, then I don't think that would be faith, this virtuous mental fact. That's my my thought, my conclusion. I don't know. But on the other hand, I mean, for example, people, Christians and Hindus and Muslims and Jews and so on, who are having faith in God, even though in Buddhism we don't say there's a God the way they explain it, who created the world and so on. But on the other hand, people who have faith in God and they're really following that, they're generally living very good lives. They're refraining from non-virtue, they're doing virtue, they're creating, and they're definitely creating the cause for good rebirths, maybe even the cause for, well, not liberation, because they don't have the methods for taking liberation, but definitely good rebirths in the future, maybe even the form realm and formless realms, like in Hinduism. They do have the methods for cultivating concentration and achieving those higher levels. So in that case, I think we could say that is faith, because it's leading to good results.
But it makes sense when I once walked in Hamburg. I had a walk in the neighborhood, and one lady stopped me and asked me who I am, and I said I'm Buddhist nun. And then she said something like, "I'm so happy. I'm a Christian, but I'm so happy to see you because I'm more afraid of people who have no faith."
In the Kachin Yeshe Gyaltsen, he has the faith and liking. Right, that it says faith is by entity a virtuous mental factor, whereas liking has both virtuous and non-virtuous factors.
Yeah, I think he gives the example of liking beer.
Beer, faith in beer.
Actually, it's from Vasubandhu, it's from Abhidharmakosha.
Because I
Yeah.
was thinking, I mean, faith in a creator God may have non-virtuous results too, right? People who kill heathen or
Sure.
so, yeah. Or like,
I was talking about the ones who have faith in God, but then really are practicing virtue, benefiting and not harming and so on. But not those who kill in the name of God. No, I wouldn't. That's not leading to good results. So maybe we stop there. So we started on the virtuous mental factors, and then next week we can do more. They're very nice. Yay! But then we get to the afflictive ones. Yeah, they're not so nice. But we have to recognize them so we can get rid of them. They're there in our mind. I was just thinking, question Western people often ask, and maybe we can talk about it next week, is, well, how do you generate faith if you don't have it? It seems like Tibetans, it's very easy for Tibetans and many Asian people, it's just almost like it's in their genes to have faith and devotion. But a lot of Western people have difficulty with that. They just don't feel it. So anyway, think about it, and we can talk about that at the beginning if you have ideas. How to have it if it doesn't arise naturally.